Alright guys, so this is just a short video that I'm going to make on one method to learn the brachial plexus along with the cervical and T1 root contributions to the peripheral nerves. So when I say that, I mean, uh, what root supplies axillary, right? Things like that. Those are the contributions to the peripheral nerves. This is one way of doing it. I mean, there's several, and I think by now most of you guys have already come up with your own ways. But if this is in any way able to help fill in some gaps or help you understand it a little bit more, then that's my goal with this. So I'm going to make this as brief as I can, but I'm going to go step by step with how I would go about learning this method and how you can do this very quickly on your piece of scrap paper if you need a reference for when you take your exam. So this is the finished version of the way that I approach mapping out the brachial plexus. So the supplies you need are probably going to be a piece of paper for the first one, but definitely start practice writing on flashcards with abbreviations for some of the longer names. I already started abbreviating some of them myself here. You're also going to need 5 different colored pens or pencils or highlighters or markers. You're going to need a yellow one, an orange one, a blue one, a green one, then a normal black one for labeling. So the goal here is to be able to map this all out in about or a little under 4 minutes. If you're able to do that, you'll be, even for those of you who need a little bit more time on exams, that should leave you more than enough time. So it's more a matter of just writing this out over and over, practicing, and figuring out the best method to draw it. But the method that I first learned it is the method that I'm going to lay out in this video. So this is just an example of how practicing it over and over again would have kind of makes it a little bit more efficient. So obviously I have my abbreviations here, but this is how I would write it on a flashcard. And this is how I would do it for an exam. So this took me about 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And of course, obviously you can start abbreviating things more and that'll probably make it go quicker. So the first thing we're going to do is write the compartmentalization of the plexus. So that's the real Texans drink cold beer. So roots, trunks, divisions, cords, and branches. So you want to have the roots, trunks, divisions relatively closer to each other, and then space out the cords and branches a little bit more, even more so than I have in this video. The second step is to write your roots. So for here, write C5 at the top obviously, then leave some space between 5 and 6. Write 6, 7, and 8 relatively close to each other, and then space out T1 just a little bit more. So the next step is you're going to use your orange marker highlighter or pencil, connect C5 and C6 and T1 to the trunk region, so from R to T, and then from there draw a straight line all the way past, just a little bit past the branches portion. Then draw a line straight up from C7 from roots to the divisions area, and then at the line that's between C5 and C6, draw a diagonal line from divisions meeting at the trunk area of C7. Next, take your yellow marker highlighter pencil and draw a white line, a yellow line beneath the C5 and C6 line from the divisions to the trunk area, and then above the C and T1 line from the divisions to the trunk area. And then draw a line from the C7 line from the divisions area and connect the 2 yellow lines that you just previously drew. Next, draw a line from the divisions area of C7 with your yellow marker all the way to the branches area, and then create a 2-way fork. So next we're going to label our trunks and cords. So superior trunk is going to become the lateral cord, middle trunk becomes the posterior cord, and inferior trunk becomes the medial cord. And remember, the reason why these chords are named lateral, posterior, and medial are because of their relation to the axillary artery. So when you go in and dissect, you're going to find the lateral cord lateral in relation to the axillary artery, posterior cord is posterior in relation to it, and then medial cord is medial in relation to it. Next thing you're going to want to do is draw sort of a semicircle with your blue marker or pen in between the lateral and posterior cord and in between the medial and posterior cord. Then at the lateral cord, draw another smaller semicircle leading to the outside of the lateral cord, and then the same on the medial cord. Next, you're going to leave the lateral cord alone, but underneath the posterior cord, you're going to draw 3 lines, and it's important that the first line is smaller than the third line. The middle line doesn't matter, but the first line must be smaller than the middle one. And then down at the medial side, you're going to want to draw 2 more lines, and it doesn't matter what the length is for these. Finishing off with our blue pen, you're going to make a small branch off of the C5 root, and then pretty much just past the meeting at the superior trunk, you're going to draw a small line above and a small line below. You're then going to take your green pen, start right off the C5 root, make a diagonal line crossing C6, C7, then somewhere past the inferior trunk meet up. And then you're going to make a line connecting this green line to C6 and C7. So we're going to start labeling some nerves here, some peripheral nerves, and with those we will put in parentheses their root contributions. So that way if you can knock them out, 2 birds in 1 stone, and whenever you write this down, you won't have any issue with knowing what roots those nerves come from. So we're going to start with the green line. So we're going to label that the long thoracic nerve, and the reason we made those 2 green connections at the top was because it receives its roots contributions from C5 through C7. So one way to remember this is C5, 6, 7, all wings go to heaven. So that way you know that the long thoracic innervates the serratus anterior muscle, and loss of that muscle or function of that muscle can result in scapular winging. So that's a clever little acronym that you can use there. The next thing we're going to do is label our 3 blue lines up top. So the first line coming off C5 root, that's going to be our dorsal scapular nerve. And the reason it's off of that is because it only receives contribution from C5. The other 2, which we wrote just past that meeting at the superior trunk, the top one is going to be suprascapular, so it's going to be the one above. So that's one way you can remember that this one is suprascapular versus nerve to subclavian. And then for the nerve to subclavian, that's going to be the one below, subclavian or below maybe. And these both receive contribution from C5 and C6, which is why we drew it past that meeting at the superior trunk. So you just knocked out all the peripheral nerves that were the most proximal or closest to the roots. So we're going to go now to the cords. We're going to start with the lateral cord and move our way down. So we only have one up here, so that's the lateral pectoral nerve. It's going to receive contributions from C5 and C7. So we're going to turn our attention to the posterior cord, and the first one, which is the higher hanging one, or the upper of the 3, is going to be the upper subscapular nerve, and it's going to receive its contributions from C5 and C6. I'm now going to name not the middle one, but the last one, because it's important to know these 2 in relation to each other. So the lower hanging line that we drew, remember we intentionally made this one longer or hanging lower than this one, that's the lower subscapular nerve. And that's going to receive, again, its contributions from C5 and C6. Finally, we're going to write down the middle one. This is going to be our thoracodorsal nerve, which by now you guys probably have picked up that innervates the lat. And it's a different, so the lower and upper subscap were both C5 and C6. This is C6, 7, and 8. So the only way that we had figured out how to remember the difference was going back to its contributions here. So the C8 contribution is going to come like that. The C6 contributions going to come like that. And the C7 contribution is going to go straight down the middle. So if you look in this area with the two yellow diagonal lines and the middle orange line, it kind of looks like a pitchfork. And we were thinking that instead of Thor having a hammer, he had a pitchfork. So not the maybe a little bit of a stretch, but if you say it enough times, then it kind of gets stuck in your head. So now we just have the last, or the medial chord to knock out. So the first one is going to be the medial pectoral nerve. Remember, the first one for the lateral chord was the lateral pectoral, so we're going to continue with that theme of having the pectoral nerves being the first ones on the outside. And this one is going to be C8 and T1. Next, we're going to name the middle line. That's going to be our medial brachial nerve. So everything off the medial chord is going to be a medial peripheral nerve. So the medial brachial nerve only receives contribution from T1. The last one is the medial antebrachial nerve. So forearm, antebrachial means forearm, and that's below, or it's last, and brachial is before that. So that's how you know that antebrachial would be the last of these three lines. And it receives contribution from C8 and T1. So there's a pattern here. The two outermost of the three lines have the same contributions, right? Lower and upper C5 and C6, medial, antebrachial, and pectoral C and T1. The middle ones are what have those exceptions or different root contributions. So it's a matter of knowing the commonality here and then figuring out for yourself what the difference is for the middle ones. So now we're going to do the branches, or what you're going to identify as the largest nerves coming off the brachial plexus. So I'm going to grab my orange pencil again, and what I did was I drew a connecting line down the middle from the two big orange lines that I drew at the beginning, and I drew a little jut out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to label these 5 branches. Okay, so by now most of you guys have probably come up with your own acronyms or used one that you found to remember these. But from top to bottom, the acronym we came up with was most alcoholics must really urinate. So that's one way from top to bottom you can remember how to label these guys. So next we're going to do root contribution for each of them. So I'm going to start with my 2 easiest, and instead of listing the root contributions, I'm just going to list their exceptions. So radial has received supply from every root except T1, and ulnar receives supply from every root except C7. Moving up, median is one of the easiest, as it generally does not have any it takes contribution from every root. And then the final 2, musculocutaneous, is going to receive supply from C5 and C7, C5 through C7, so C5, 6, and 7, and then axillary is simply going to be C5 and C6. Then once you're done with that, you have just drawn not only the brachial plexus, mapped out the brachial plexus, but you have also put in the peripheral nerve names, and then the root contributions to each nerve.